This is a reading from the Autobiography of Maria Valtorta. Fourth part. To offer oneself to love is to offer oneself to all sorrows. Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Saint Theresa of Avila writes in her Way of Perfection, "What a difference whoever has experienced human and divine love must find between one and the other." It is true. The dawn of a misty winter day and the clear, pure dawn of a radiant summer morning, a little pool with a tightly bounded shoreline and the open sea whose limit is the measureless horizon, the small fire with a few dried twigs and that of a blast furnace, and the trembling flicker of a modest oil lamp, and the dazzling sun, all resemble one another more closely than do human love, even the most dizzying kind and divine love. I had loved twice, once with the ardor of my youthful years, and in this I had known the fevers of the flesh. A second time I had loved more with the soul than with the flesh, and precisely because it was love of the more select part, it had given me ecstasies and revelations which were much more noble and long-lasting than the former one. Strictly human love is destined to have a short life, even if it is extremely ardent in its fleeting hour, while the love combining soul and body with the attraction of spirits and matter, love-friendship, is more tenacious, and not even disillusionment puts an end to it. In this the Colonel had been quite right in prophesying to me that I would love Mario as I had not even remotely loved Roberto. But now that I loved Jesus in a manner more intense than that common to the great mass of believers in him, I understood the difference between this supernatural love and my human love, or rather, loves. My life was now entirely thrown into this love. External things still existed and occasioned thoughts and joys and sorrows, above all sorrows. But now I saw these things from other regions, as if through a glass, a lens which changed them for me, rendering worrisome thoughts bearable, joys not indispensable, and sorrows sweet. I now viewed everything through God. He was the lens making me see things in a light different from the one they would have had for me and for everyone if we had looked at them with human sight and judgment. I now believed that everything took place according to a law of love, a jealous, overbearing love, perhaps, but whose jealousy and overbearance attested to its being a great love. Oh yes, Jesus knows how to be jealous and overbearing, with a divine jealousy and a divine overbearance, which, if you have once said yes in full awareness, you no longer escape. Jesus had asked me for that yes at school, and now, after having convinced me that on earth everything is sadness, he was asserting his rights. All I am saying might seem to contradict what I said at the beginning of this story of mine, but it does not. I then stated that God does not impose himself, but in order to act, wants the soul to be willing to be moved. Only then does the avalanche take shape. That's the way it is. There is no contradiction whatsoever. In adolescence I had said, "Lord, I am at your disposal," and the first layer of snow had formed, gradually becoming enlarged. Afterwards, with the continual acts of desire, the soul formulated at that time. Next, there had been a pause. Something had restrained the formation and more intense onrush of the avalanche, and it had been my human period, the period of distractions, or rather of deviations, and Jesus had waited. Only at the most tremendous moment involving them, to save me from ruin, had he made a gesture to call me back. He had come with the dream to convey his gentle reproach, to make me reflect and stop in my race towards evil. And then he had waited again, patient and good. He had given me all the time to heal morally, and meanwhile worked to isolate me, though not seeming to. Oh, in this he was quite active. He wanted me, and took everything away so that I would be left with nothing but him. When I later cried out, "I want to be yours," he took possession of me completely, and I no longer had a heartbeat, breath, glance, word, or thought which did not pass through the divine filter of his love, just as nothing came into me from outside without passing through the same divine filter. This has lasted for 20 years now, and the identification has constantly been growing closer, and the filter ever more perfect, so that the evil which may come to me from others is muffled by that divine protection, and the good I may do expands over my fellow men ever more purely, for love cleanses it of all human imperfections. I still suffer greatly, for it is my destiny to suffer, but the pain coming to me from men is assuaged by the joy coming to me from Christ. I therefore tell myself, and I am convinced of what I am saying, that I have come to grasp that the only real sorrows of a heart are those which come from God to try us or to punish us. The sorrows coming from men naturally make us weep. Jesus also wept, but we too, like him, in weeping feel a sweetness merging with it, on reflecting that even the sorrow coming to us from our neighbor serves to redeem, to expiate, to obtain for our fellows. When, however, God strikes us by withdrawing his invisible presence and leaving us apparently alone, then we suffer much, indescribably. I believe it is a reduced figure of what the souls in purgatory must suffer, and I don't even want to think of the damned in hell. O pain of mine that come from God and have 1,000 visages, may you be blessed. Blessed are you as you are now. The pain of illness, the pain of advancing poverty, the pain of incomprehension on the part of my fellow men around my sick bed, the pain caused by numberless things at present, and blessed are you as you were in past years. The pain of being derided for imaginary illness, the pain of not seeing my father in his final hour, the pain of not being understood in my apostolic ardor, the pain of my mother's lack of love, ever and ever, again the same. And blessed were you, pain, when, not understanding you in your regal robe, I did not love you. My pain at age 20, and that of my broken love. Oh, blessed, blessed pain, that have taken me from the world and given me to God. Blessed for the knowledge which has come to me from you. Blessed for the charity you have infused into me. Blessed for the wings you have restored to myself, whereby I have been able to collect myself in heaven with all my holiest desires. Blessed, O pain, that have joined me to Jesus on the same cross, in a single mission, which has been perpetuated for 20 centuries, to bear souls to the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of God to souls. I shall never cease to bless you, O pain, O my joy, for in you I have found peace. It was in the spring of 1923 that I wrote my first offering to God. That prayer, which I repeated for 8 years, must still be in one of my books of devotion. In it, I humbled myself in the sight of God for my past faults, and asked to be forgiven in the name of his divine mercy. But since I was beginning to see with increasing clarity what the will of God was for me, I also felt that asking for forgiveness did not suffice, as loving him did not either. My love had to be a penitent love, like that of the Magdalene, whose life had so struck me during that sermon in the exercises of 1912. Everything which is asked of God is found, I said at the beginning of this story, but everything which God has sown is also found, provided the soul bends over itself, seeking the divine seed. I now recall that on the distant day of November 1912, Jesus had told me, "You will not be like Agnes, the pure and innocent one who saw nothing but me. You will be one who comes to me by other ways, after many experiences, and who loves me through repentance and continuous, long, and hidden sacrifice." In that first offering of mine, I thus asked Jesus to grant me the grace to have time to expiate the evil done, and to make reparation for all my hours of despair, to make me live in pain all the years I had spent in error, and the unholy impatience to leave life. As you see, I was still praying selfishly. For my soul, it is true, to make reparation to him, it is true, but not yet perfect prayer. Later, I prayed better. I was at the beginning then, and when one is learning the alphabet, one cannot seek at once to write a letter. Don't you think so? I also asked in that offering that God grant me the joy of bearing souls to him, especially those of my parents and Mario. But even here, though their request was good in itself, I was mistaken in the means. I still did not know that prayer signifies much, but sacrifice is everything. The word is effective, but the silence covering an immolation does 1,000 times as much. In my zeal as a convert, I spoke a lot at that time, but I was still opposed to suffering much. I felt I was already doing a great deal in not lamenting over the pain striking me, undergoing it with resignation, and thanking God for it. I later went much further. And yet, how good Jesus is! God granted a first conquest to his Maria, whose zeal was still lame, quite soaked in humanity. It was an old woman, aged 72. As a result of a set of painful circumstances, she had been separated from God for 30 years, blaming him for all the misfortunes which had befallen her. She was in the same state I had formerly been in, but with the difference, to her detriment, of having remained that way for so long, and not abandoning her condition, even when age suggested that death was near. I could not boast of having been better than she. God's goodness had accelerated my resurrection in 1,000 ways, but precisely for this reason, I wanted to be an agent of good for my old friend. I would say nearly a guiding light. I regretted seeing the old woman continuing with that rancor, that tremendous bitterness of non-faith until the end. I wanted to give her old age the comfort of youthfulness in her heart, a second youth, but sweeter and more useful than the first. I succeeded. My dear old woman returned to God and is still with him, for she is still living, notwithstanding her age of 92. I was proud of it with a holy pride. I had already borne 2 souls to Jesus, my own and the old woman's. In my case, if he had not been the one to bear it off, I really would have been done for. But the fact is that after his initial assistance, I went forward with good will. After this, my first conquest, I constantly improved. My desire to be an instrument of God increased, and in my mind a whole program of penitent life was outlined, made even more difficult by our family's way of living. For Mother does not share certain ideas. If she regards even frequent visits to church and communions as excesses, just imagine what she thinks of theories on mortification. I always have the feeling I've got a gag over my mouth. I try to speak as little as possible, or rather, I tried to speak as little as possible of spiritual things, even when the force of love was such as to give me a real longing to speak of them. I now speak without restraint, thinking that something will penetrate into that heart, so closed to the supernatural. But I get the impression I am speaking in Turkish or Hindi. She does not understand, and it's a great grace if she remains silent and does not label me a lunatic. It does not matter. I go forward just the same. To be regarded as a lunatic out of love for Christ is something filling me with joy. All those truly in love with Jesus are mad, divine madmen, martyrs, penitents, the cloistered. What are all who renounce liberty, life, human reputation, wealth, and health out of love for God, if not lunatics? Madmen whose madness is the same as that which led Jesus to the cross, the madness of the cross, of which Paul speaks. Footnote 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. The apostle with ardent words and a bold heart. The first offering, which I felt to be incomplete and fouled by still 2 human veins, was no longer enough for me. Jesus' glance was increasingly alive in me and was drawing me higher and higher. All of 1923 and a good part of 1924 passed that way. In my family there was only intransigence and despotism, but I took refuge in God. In September 1924, we had come to Viareggio. In Florence, the landlord demanded the apartment under the deceitful pretext of putting up his son there, who was getting married, but with the real intention of renting it out to new tenants and multiplying the rent tenfold, an old and ever-new story. My father then decided to write to our relatives in Calabria to see if they could find us a little house there. But what would have been easy in 1921 was now difficult. People were flowing back into Reggio, which was rising up again from its ruins, with new houses and pretty streets, and there were never unoccupied houses. Even at the hotel, where they would very gladly have put us up before, they had now made do with other relatives who helped them to keep an eye on the personnel. Add to this a bit of resentment over father's obstinacy, which had lasted 4 years, and you will understand that everything ended in, "You can't come." We then came to Viareggio, We had acquaintances here who facilitated the purchase of our house. I was quite content to be coming to the sea, which I loved so much, and to be leaving Florence, full of bitter memories for me. The house was bought on September 21st, and on October 23rd we took possession. A new and different period in my life thus began, in which I grew more and more in God. To live in an act of perfect love, Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, footnote 1. Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, 1873 to 1897, called The Little Flower, wrote the story of a soul cited several times. I began this fourth part of my story with a statement by the Little Flower. In fact, to offer oneself to love as a victim is to ask Jesus to raise us up upon his cross and suffer all the pains which he did before and after the crucifixion. In the dialogue taking place between the soul and himself, Jesus asks, "Can you drink my chalice?" And the soul replies, "Yes, I can, for I want to be like my master. For I have understood that if the grain of wheat does not die, it does not bear fruit. For I have understood that only when one is raised upon the cross are souls attracted to God. For I have understood, above all, your thirst which no drink can quench, but only our love." To offer oneself to love means, then, to offer oneself to pain. But is it pain to suffer together with Christ and for the sake of Christ? No, it is joy, very deep, inexhaustible joy. I can definitely say so, having been inundated with all pains for so many years. I confess to you, Father, that while I have not struggled too much to overcome my reluctance to speak of my past, now that I am coming to the best part, I must make an appreciable effort. I am afraid I will express badly what I feel so well. Secondly, there are pages of light in the lives of souls which should be read only by God, who has written them therein. All right, I shall think of you as a minister of God, and whoever speaks in the name of God, as if he were God. I shall thus obey and go forward, pushing aside my temptation to end my story here with a recapitulatory statement such as, "I offered myself to God, and God accepted me." I am very happy to know that you are quite devoted to the sweet little Saint of Lisieux. You will thus understand me better. After arriving in Viareggio, I continued my life with the same rule as in Florence. In addition, some dashes to the sea and the pines early in the morning or around noon, at the hours when sea and pinewood have fewer people contemplating them. I have always been a loner, and crowds have unfailingly bothered me. Beauty is ruined for me if I'm surrounded by vain chattering. I thus I sought, to go and admire the beauty of the sea and the pinewood when they were unfrequented. Viareggio provided me with another gift as well, going out every day to do the shopping. In Florence, Mother was usually the one to go out. Here I was, and this helped me to make little visits to Christ and the Blessed Sacrament without drawing down maternal wrath. In December 1924, I felt a very intense inspiration to have the complete volume with the 4 Gospels and the life of Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. I must acknowledge that since I had returned to God, I had always been faithful to the inspirations which came to me, a prompt, cheerful faithfulness, even if the inspiration spurred me on to difficult actions. Among other things, I was then engulfed in gratitude to the good Lord for a favor he had granted me, a material favor, but one I had requested very trustingly. When Mother had gone to look for the house, I had intensely asked Jesus to enable her to find a small dwelling, suitable for the 3 of us, which would be sound and in good condition, with a lot of space in front and in back. Our house now has ample gardens behind it, and at that time Villa Rigutti in front, with its enormous park. The Apennine could be seen, and all the little towns scattered over the nearest hills. I would have liked to have seen the sea as well, but one cannot have everything, and so I asked only for a house with lots of space around it. On account of my life constantly quite shut inside, except for shopping and going to church and the fleeting trips to the sea, I never went out. The promenade did not witness my going up and down like a pendulum. If you notice, even now my house is the only one facing a green background. All the others, built on the terrain of the former Rigutti villa, are at street level. There's a picture of Viareggio on postcards of the period in which Maria Valtorta moved there. A view Antonio Fratti Street above, where she went to live, and the pier below. The writing on the postcard says, Un saluto da Viareggio. Igneo torrente dilagava il sole per deserti del cielo incandescenti e al suo divino riso il mar ridea. Burning torrent was released by the sun among the deserts of the incandescent sky, and at his loving laugh the sun, the oceans smiled. By G. Garducci. A small thing, isn't it? But I was increasingly convinced that Jesus loved me so much that he granted me even these trifles to content his Maria. Just imagine what he gave to my soul. Drawing on my meager purse, Mother would give me 5 lire every other month, and they had to suffice for all my personal needs as regarded alms, purchasing books and music, and so on. I turned to a friend of mine who is so devout that she's practically a sister and spends her time among priests and nuns, and commissioned her to buy and send me the story of a soul and the 4 Gospels. On January 28, 1925, a big package arrived with the books requested, and a volume added on by my dear former schoolmate, which was a collection of gospel commentaries intended for young people. I think it was by a priest, Father Baudernam, if I remember rightly. I point this out because an angelical creature, who became a nun and later died after a few years of conventual life, liked it so much that I gave it to her when she entered the novitiate. I immediately read the story of a soul. I felt I was going back to school, but at school the sisters had stopped at the life proper and the remembrances and counsels. With the complete works in hand, I went ahead. My soul was melting with love. I had found the harpist capable of making the strings of my spirit resound. I wanted to make them sing to God, but still could not manage to. Little Saint Therese, with her small hand, took mine and guided it over the strings, teaching me the canticle of love and self-giving. When I read the act of offering to merciful love, I wept with joy. I had found what I was seeking. If to enter the Franciscan Third Order, I had imposed a trial period on myself, now I did not wait an instant. For 2 years I had been looking for a spiritual master who would act as my godmother at my rite of sacrifice to God. I had found her at last. I decided to make a very good confession and a fervent communion, even better than usual, and then pronounce my act of offering. I am impulsive in certain cases. I am such when I finally find something I've been long looking for. Then I do not reflect further, for I have already reflected before. It must not be forgotten that I had set myself the goal of imitating the Magdalene. Jesus had inspired me to do so, and when she met Jesus, Mary of Magdala did not stand thinking much. She started to follow him. Who knows for how long? Nauseated by her life of vice, she had been looking for someone to give her the strength to come out of it. Once she had found the Master, her passionate soul had felt that he was the one sought after, and with the impulsiveness of certain characters, extreme in both good and evil, she had chosen him to be her king. A little malignant voice, which may perhaps have been a devil, insinuated, "Be careful about what you're doing. Think it over. And if you die afterwards?" But I drove him away with a shrug. In the evening, in the room I am in now, with my heart pounding, I read my act of offering, kneeling on the floor, and I have been renewing it every day since then. Since that day, sorrows have come raining down upon me. But if it were granted man to cancel the time transpired, and I were to return to January 28th, 1925, the day I received those books, I would do it over again, what I have done, and even more joyfully. For in these 18 years, amidst the sea of suffering in which I have been immersed, with my better part, I have always savored a spiritual joy, which I believe is a foretaste of that which we shall enjoy in the heavenly Jerusalem, where rejoicing lasts forever. With the little flower, I too can say, from that evening on the new period in my life, from that evening on the new period in my life began, the loveliest of all, the most brimful of heavenly graces. Charity entered into my heart with a need to forget myself, to give myself, and from then on I was happy. Oh, I can repeat so many things said by this sweet little saint. I have also suffered and suffer when thinking of the blood of Christ, dripping in vain for so many. Jesus' cry, "I'm thirsty," always echoes in my soul, that sees the thirst of its God and wants to quench it. And I also see with boundless pity the poor souls, thirsty in turn, that cannot find the fount of living water, slaking all thirsts. And I live dying every minute to bear souls to God, and God to souls. When in the early stages of the offering I sometimes hesitated to carry out a sacrifice, I seemed to be seeing Jesus' imploring gaze. How could I resist that gaze, asking me, a poor creature, to have mercy on his desire? Then I would overcome all hesitation, and, breaking myself in all that was human, I would effect a new sacrifice to make my Jesus smile. Jesus' smile repaid me for all my sacrifices, but at the same time my thirst for sacrifice constantly increased out of desire for his smile. To be consumed by love, to be consumed for the sake of love, can there be a sweeter or more powerful joy than this? Human words cannot describe it, for they remain impotent to describe the infinite, and the joy of being a victim is an infinite joy. I proceeded that way then, loving, being loved, and having love as my only goal and guide. I had no guide or light except that which shone in my heart, says St. John of the Cross, nor did I have any guide or light except for the one provided by the divine eyes of Jesus, who now lived in me. The eyes of Jesus. Don't tell me I'm mad. Understand me. I now had the sensation of that gaze opened in my heart and seeing through me. I felt I was looking at things and people with the eyes of Jesus, because my personality was absorbed in his, and I saw, spoke, and acted through him. How often I have felt that my words, as a poor creature, were being transformed at my lips' threshold into other words, which on account of the charity informing them, I could no longer call my own, but his, Jesus's. How often my glances, when I felt some adversity was causing them to resemble a falconet's, softened their instinctive aggressiveness into a loving light, which was not mine, but his, Jesus's. How often an act of mine, not exactly in keeping with the law of charity, was mysteriously transformed into an act of kindliness, whose origin was certainly not to be found in me, such a poor, mean soul, but in him, in Jesus, who was in me. And I did not lack the means to experience this life of Jesus in me. At home, I had to ask my King every minute, "You act. Break me as a glass is broken to annul my personality, which takes offense at so many injustices, and reform me in yourself, as you would act at this moment." The little flower had taught me that God is loved with rose petals, with the small sacrifices made out of love. Out of love, I asked Jesus to give me the strength to make them continually, so as to love him that way. And seeing that I wasn't worth a cent on my own, he took my place. Oh, I cannot boast about the good I have done. It is Jesus who has done it. I have contributed nothing except complete submission to every operation of his. Jesus would say, "Act this way," and I would say, "Say this," and I would. "Say this," and I would. "Perform this other action," and I would. Oh, if souls only understood how useful it is for them to abandon themselves to the divine operations. At that time I would have wanted to enter the company of St. Paul, just to be able to tell the multitudes that Jesus should be loved with absolute devotion, to find heavenly happiness beginning on this earth, to be able to speak of the benefits of God, to be able to sing the song of thanksgiving and love for this compassionate God, whose joy is to lead us to heaven. But many obstacles interfered with this desire of mine: mother's selfishness, first of all, pity for my father, and my permanently broken health. The palpitation of the heart did not subside with the passing of the years. It was always the same and painful, as were the spinal aches. But with all this, I worked even to excess, as the doctors later said, just to keep mother content, and in the vain hope of winning her benevolence. I worked and worked like a machine, household chores, shopping, cooking, whitewashing walls, raising pigeons, remaking mattresses, and people to be served, for in the summer we had paying guests who were offered board. Everything fell upon my shoulders, and also making suits, sweaters, and linen. I even made father's summer jackets. But it was too much. The chief physician in Florence had recommended to mother and me that I not fall into complete idleness, but utterly avoid arriving at physical fatigue with the threat of cardiac collapse. But who thought of that? Not fearful by nature, I got over the pain of my heart and damaged vertebrae by laughing. I was assisted by Strophanthus and Bertelli plasters, and got along. And then the idea of a holocaust for the sake of love now appealed to me. Saint Therese had worked well, though at the end of her strength. My mother, who saw me with good color, even a bit plump, and always on the go, did not manage even incidentally that this might do me harm, did not imagine even incidentally that this might do me harm, and she went on demanding and demanding ever more vigorously. If I sometimes said I had more intense pain in my heart or spine, she would come out with a whole repertoire of her imaginary ailments, and that would take care of me. Just imagine that she tormented me for 3 years by saying she had hemorrhages caused by an internal tumor. She always wanted a large nettle poultice over her lower abdomen, for I didn't know who had told her or where she had read that they were a surefire cure for neoplasmas. If only they were. A poem on nettles would have to be composed. I thus went every day to get my hands and arms stung, gathering nettles, and then prepared them, additional pricks like those before, and in the evening, when she decided to go to bed, I made that rather unaromatic poultice and took it to her upstairs. The end result was that at midnight I was still up and about, dead tired, and I would get up at 6 in the winter and 5 in the summer. It later turned out that the alleged tumor was nothing but a bothersome but not dangerous disturbance from which at least 3/4 of humanity suffers, and she was really cured effectively when, abandoning nettle therapy, she decided to apply a cream designed for those varicose veins. But how many tears out of fear that I would lose my mother, and how many exhausting sprints through pine woods and fields in search of nettles. And that was one ailment. But to hear her, she was beset by them all, except for leprosy and tuberculosis. As you observe, in spite of all her ills, she is still alive at age 82. She now has trouble walking, but if only I could walk as she does, I would feel like a queen. So you can rightly think that I was certainly not spared then. Quite the opposite. Of never reaching the point of fatigue, I reached and surpassed super fatigue in such a way that when evening approached, I even walked stooping over and keeling towards the right, broken, but no one was concerned about it. No possibility of the company of St. Paul then, another sacrifice offered to Jesus, but I kept busy just the same. The guests, friends, and all who by pure chance approached me were able to take the place of the masses that I could not instruct as a Pauline. Provided one wants to, one can always be an apostle, and if one cannot have the display of a grandiose, recognized apostolate, which may, however, bring along with it the trimmings of pride and human dissipation, one can always have the glory of a humble, hidden apostolate, known only to God and corroborated more by our suffering than by our acting.